MIT just dropped a study showing 95% of GenAI projects fail. Why? Because companies keep chasing bigger and bigger models. But here's the truth. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. In this video, I'll show you the framework to choose the right LLM for your needs and avoid the mistakes that almost everyone is making. Large language models are an obvious topic in any AI interview prep. If you're still using old FAANG prep guides, you're already losing ground. The rules have changed, and this free AI playbook shows you what's really being tested in modern FAANG interviews. Insider strategies, hidden evaluation matrix, a 90-day mastery plan, the exact playbook successful candidates are using right now. Everyone's grabbing it. Don't be the one left behind. Link in description. We talked a little bit about the landscape and maybe touched on a little bit of some of the criteria. So let's look at what are some of the key factors when it comes to selecting an LLM. So there's really four broad areas or pillars you need to look at when you want to select a large language model. So this really across performance, it's technical, business, and security and governance. So those are really the four areas, the key areas that you want to focus on when it comes to selecting your LLM, and we'll dive into each one of these. So from a performance standpoint, what you really want to understand is how well does your model perform? So in terms of performance, you have things like, what is the latency? What is the context length in terms of how much information can the model remember, while you're working with it? And this can vary quite a bit. So for example, if you look at, like the Gemini, the Pro series of models, either the 2.0 or 1.5 Pro, they actually can support up to 2 million tokens. So very large context window. And then some of the smaller models are anywhere from 128K to 200K to 400KB context window. So you do want to understand what that context length is based on your use case. You also want to look at how reliable and accurate are the outputs for your model. Depending on the use case, not every use case might need reasoning capability. So you want to understand it. Does your use case require reasoning, complex reasoning? So if you're solving, PhD level, if you need to solve PhD level math type problems or deep logical analysis, where you need to go through a lot of reasoning, you just need to understand, do you actually need those abilities? In terms of evaluating, how well your model is performing, you can look at some of the benchmarks. And I would take this with a grain of salt. One of the resources I use is LM Arena, which is almost like the unofficial benchmark source for all these different LLMs. So that's something you can take a look at, and they have a listing with different scores based on different use cases. So that's actually a good place to look at to give you a little bit of understanding of where did these different models fall in. But I would take those with a grain of salt. And you really want to take your specific use case and you want to do your own testing and put the model to test in your environment to really come up with that final assessment. From a technical standpoint, you definitely want to look at latency and throughput because this will become very critical if you have a real-time application. So let's say if you're building a chatbot, maybe it's a live chatbot for customer service, where, maybe you have live customers asking questions, or they want to maybe look up an order or have a question about a product. That's where speed and response speed becomes critical, versus if you're doing some sort of batch processing, where, maybe, you're doing some language translation. You have documents that you need to translate from English to another language or vice versa. And these don't have to be real time. So you could just run these on in batch mode. And you will also see there's difference in pricing. So a lot of the, especially the proprietary closed source LLM providers, you'll see batch tokens generally tend to be less expensive compared to real time or on demand. So that's something, if you have a batch use case, you want to try to see how you can leverage the batch option to help you lower costs. You also want to look at scalability. All the different providers, whether you're directly going to one of the LLM providers, whether that's OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or Grok or anyone else, they do have restrictions on your TPS or transactions per second, or how many requests you can have concurrent requests submitted to their API. So you want to look at that as well, because that will actually impact how that end user experience for your application. You also want to look at some of the infrastructure requirements. I mean, this is if you're going to, whether you're going to host this yourself, if you're using an API, then it maybe really doesn't matter the compute needs. But if you're running this model, if you're using it for inference, maybe on your own infrastructure, you want to make sure you have the right GPU hardware for being able to run your inference on. And then you also want to look at what is your deploying and hosting option. So do you want to deploy this in the cloud? Do you want to sort of do this on-prem? Especially some of the larger organizations still have some on-prem presence, unless you're a startup or a smaller organization. And then you want to look at whether you do cloud or hybrid. Lastly, you do want to look at the integration. This generally is not a problem. Most of the major mainstream providers, they do have APIs and SDKs, so they're generally very compatible. And these days, what I'm starting to see is a lot of model providers, they do support the OpenAI API. So you can actually just install the standard OpenAI SDK, OpenAI libraries for whatever language of choice you use, and it could be any model on the covers, and you can just use you can use the same. So if you're used to programming with OpenAI, the same code will just work. You just have to change the base URL and the model name. So that is something which I'm starting to see happen in the industry. From a business standpoint, I touched on this earlier, you do want to look at per token pricing, and these do vary. There are variation in both input tokens and even output tokens, and generally output tokens are more expensive than input tokens. So you want to make sure you do your due diligence when it comes to what the token pricing is, and if you're going to be hosting this model on your own infrastructure, whether in the cloud or elsewhere, what are the costs for that, and also the development and integration costs. So you really want to look at the big picture. You want to look at the TCO, or the total cost of ownership, which really includes everything. It's going to be hardware, software, development, training. So it's that big picture. So from an organizational standpoint, if you have a business leader making a decision, they really know what is the impact of some of the decisions you're going to be making in terms of picking and making some of these choices with an LLM. I think a lot of us have seen too many reports in the news where I think the number was somewhere around 75 to 80% of businesses are not seeing value from their investment. And that is something you want to try to avoid by making sure you do the right due diligence. And from a vendor and ecosystem perspective, you want to make sure, what is the type of support you're going to get, especially if you're going to use an open source model. You do have many vendors that will support open source models, but you want to make sure if it's community support or if they're using vendor support, what does that documentation look like? What is that future roadmap alignment and vendor stability? I know this is a space that's growing very quickly, and you do have a lot of startups in this space that are taking some of the open source models and then they're adding their own either fine tuning to it or their own secret sauce to it, and basically making those available for use. So if you're going to pick one of these smaller companies, just you want to make sure if they get acquired, you have that you have a clear picture of what that roadmap would look like, and you should be prepared that they might get acquired by one of the bigger companies, whether that's Anthropic or OpenAI. Coming to security and governance, I know this is a huge topic in itself, and this is something you would have to really read the privacy guidelines and the security guidelines for each model and each model provider. So this is where you need to do some homework. Generally with a lot of the paid, so if you're actually going to one of the closed source or proprietary models, and if you're generally either paying to use the API or if your company has a custom agreement or like an enterprise agreement with these companies, they generally are not using your data to train their model. But that is something you want to make sure you read the T's and C's, the terms and conditions, to really understand, how's your data being processed, where is it stored, who else is using the model, is this, the model that you're accessing, is that dedicated to your organization, is it shared with others? So there's a lot of data access controls. You want to figure out how it's actually working when it comes to the provider and who, where this is being hosted. You also want to see what sort of audit trails you have. Most organizations most industries are regulated, whether you're in healthcare or whether you're in banking or finance, or manufacturing, you have different regulations. Every industry has their own regulations. So you want to make sure from a compliance perspective, you're actually checking all the boxes. From a risk perspective, all models do have some bias. It's really based on how they're trained or data is trained. So this is something, when you run your tests with your own data, this is where you can get a little better evaluation of, if there's any bias, what does that look like? Typically these models have guardrails to prevent any toxicity or prevent any harmful content, but that's something you have to test to make sure, through sort of intelligent prompt injection. You cannot basically break those guardrails and sort of have the model do things it shouldn't be doing. So again, this is something which you'd have to work through testing, and also, looking at the reliability in terms of, are the outputs consistent? Because even that these are probabilistic, you will see some variation, but what is that degree of variation in terms of the outputs? So in summary, if you're looking to select a model, so here are some things to avoid. So don't get caught up in the hype. I know sometimes, whether it's the mainstream media or even social media, there's a lot of noise when it comes to AI and LLMs. So you want to try to shut some of that noise down and really make a data-driven decision using some of the concepts we talked about earlier across the different categories. You really want to focus on the total cost of ownership. I think far too many organizations have ignored this, which is why they've seen their costs sort of balloon and go out of control. And also not testing with real data. You want to use real data to test a model, and then really look at those T's and C's and what are the security considerations, and how is your data being used, and what does the access to the model look like. And of course, the biggest is not always the best. So we'll talk a little bit more about how do you sort of pick that right model, and then really aligning into your roadmap. Instead, you really want to work backwards, starting with the business requirements. I know as technologists, it's very easy to get caught up in the technology, but you really want to start with the business requirements first. You want to use real use cases that that will be impactful and will move the needle for your organization and for the business. You also want to factor in, what will this look like when you deploy this, in terms of skills and training and enablement, and what does operating this model look like? And then, of course, given how fast things are changing, you do want to plan, for change, and also to be able to scale this out. So moving to the next section, let's talk about a framework you can use for actually choosing the right LLM for your use case. So there's really 4 steps to this process in terms of an LLM selection framework. So it really starts with the requirements. It then, once you have your requirements gathered, and this is really where, I encourage a lot of my customers to spend their time, spend most of their time in the requirements gathering. Once you have a good buttoned-down set of requirements, that's when you can actually move into the evaluation phase, and this is where you'd actually test and validate once you go through the evaluation. And then finally, when you make a decision, you would then sort of go through this deployment phase where you would deploy it, and then you would operationalize your model. So let's take a look at what these 4 phases look like. So starting with the requirement, you really want to figure out what use cases, what business problems is this LLM going to solve. So what the specific tasks is this LLM going to perform? Is this going to be used for summarizing text? Is this going to be used for, a customer service chatbot? Is this going to be used for generating code? So you really want to figure out what exactly are those use cases, and you want to define success metrics for each of these use cases. What does good look like? And it's, without having the right success metrics, it's going to be very hard for you to measure and evaluate, which will be the next phase of the framework. You really want to understand what is that user experience going to look like, especially if this is going to be a real-time model where someone's going to be interacting with it in real time. So you want to look at things like the response time. What is that UI? What does that interface look like? How does this integrate with other systems in your organization? In most cases, these LLMs, they, generally have to integrate with other systems in your organization. So you really want to understand what does that integration look like. And from a volume expectations, you really want to know what sort of load you're gonna expect this model to generate, because it's gonna eventually translate into requests or transactions per second or transactions per minute, which you want to factor in so you can plan for growth. Now, in the real world, unfortunately, we do have constraints we have to deal with, and in the last couple of years, the number one constraint which I have seen in various conversations I've had with different customers is budget seems to be like the number one constraint. So, what are the budget constraints you're dealing with? What is the timeline in terms of, your business stakeholders? When do they need it? I know the answer is usually it's people need it yesterday. So, figuring out what the timelines look like, understanding the security and compliance requirements. So if you're in a regulated industry, what those regulations are and how do they translate into your solution, and then what are your technical requirements in terms of infrastructure, and also being able to understand the skills and capabilities of your team. So if you need to build some sort of a training or enablement program for you to be successful as you look to evaluate and eventually deploy the model. So here's a very high level evaluation matrix, and these are just samples. So I just have this slide here, which and you would adjust your criteria, and you'd also adjust the weights based on what is important for your organization, for the business. But really, this is a simplified version. So you could really take each of these criteria and sort of break it down into very specific requirements. But at a minimum, you want to have at least these 5 different categories of performance, costs, latency, security, and support, and then assign it to different weights. And then if there's I have it as model ABC, but this could really be, what other solutions you're looking to evaluate. So this is where you would put those in, and then you would fill these out, and you'd look through those final scores to make a decision at the end of your evaluation. We next move into the testing and validation phase. So this is really where you would use real examples from your organization. You also want to make sure you test some of the edge cases. So it's very easy to test sort of, the most routine or common use case. And in the pilot, you do want to pick a few edge cases. So this way you're able to handle any sort of errors or unexpected behaviors or boundary conditions that you may otherwise not see. You definitely want to involve actual users. So this is a mistake I've seen some organizations make, where if this is being run from an IT organization or an IT team, they sort of tend to do this in isolation and make this announcement to the business saying, hey, look what we have for you. So I've encouraged a lot of my customers that I work with to involve users early on, get their feedback, and sort of use that as an iterative process to build out your testing and evaluation strategy. In terms of success, there's both quantitative and qualitative things you can look at for success. So you can look at things like, if its response time is important for you, or if cost is important for you, or accuracy scores, you would basically measure those and document those. And then from a qualitative perspective, is it ease of use? How does it integrate? What is the user satisfaction? So those are some things you want to make sure you capture as part of your evaluation as well. So let's say things go well. You picked a model and you want to make a decision here. So this is where you want to basically use that evaluation matrix to make a data-driven decision on what that decision needs to be. You look at your results, you look at the overall alignment and roadmap, how this fits into your overall future state. And at this point, really, you're looking into that implementation planning. So you're looking to see how can you operationalize the market now that you made a decision. How do you come up with that final architecture? How do you work through the different integration requirements? How do you work with security and governance? And then you come up with training and enablement. Maybe you might need to build a training plan for people. They may have to learn new skills. And how do you sort of get people ramped up in the organization so this can actually be a successful deployment? And then you look at operationalizing this, through your support and operations process. If you like this video, you will love what I have to say next. The 14-week Agentic AI program at Interview Kickstart helps engineers build real career-ready skills. You'll work on 2 live projects with FAANG instructors and leave with portfolio work that actually makes a difference in hiring. Over 20,000 tech professionals have already trained with Interview Kickstart, with many moving into roles paying upwards of 300K. Want to learn more? Join the free upcoming webinar, ask questions, meet the instructors, and see if it's a fit. Not ready yet? No problem. Start with the Agentic AI building videos here on the YouTube channel. We recommend this one. Either way, the key is to just get started.